Hello students, welcome to Shri classes. Today we will begin the new chapter, which is chapter number 6, life process, lecture 1. So we'll see what are the life processes. Before we define the life processes, let us try to distinguish between living and non-living. Living and non-living. How do you generally distinguish between the living and non-living things? See, one of the best methods to distinguish between these two is the movements, the visible movements. So what are the visible movements generally? If you read the first paragraph of your textbook, he gives very nicely a running dog or a cow which is chewing some cud, or a man shouting loudly on the street, walking on the street, etc. So based on these, can we say that these organisms are living in nature? Okay. So the visible movement is one of the characteristics of something being alive, isn't it? So apart from this, say for example, the breathing process. During breathing also, if we are not moving, suppose if we are not moving and if we are sleeping, then also based on the breathing process we say that yes, the organism is living. Isn't it? So during breathing also we can observe certain body movements. But a case may arise where the organism may breathe without making any movements at all. In that case, how do you conclude that the organism is living or not? Some animals may breathe without the visible movements at all. In that case, it is very difficult to say that only the visible movement which we see, like a running man, a shouting man, a walking cow, or a running dog, or for that matter a running cheetah or a lion, if these visible movements, the physical visible movements, are the characteristics of a life, or are the characteristics of something being alive, what about the other kind of movements, invisible movements? So can I conclude something like this? Are the visible movements are the only defining criteria for something is living? My question to you is are these visible movements which you observe are the defining characteristics of the living organisms? Or would you be able to observe some other movements? If you ask the biologists, they say even these molecular movements are considered to be the defining characteristic of the life basically. So both movement, visible movements as well as the non-visible molecular movements are considered to be the defining characteristics of something is alive or the life, I can say. Why it is so? Let us see now. The molecular movements basically, which are not visible by the naked eyes, which I can say those are invisible movements. So how do you say that these invisible movements are really one of the defining characteristics of life basically? See, we already know organ systems organs, or I can say upward arrow, this is better. Organs, how these organs are made up of? Tissues. How these tissues are made up of? Cells. How these cells are made up of? These cells are made up of molecules basically. What is these molecules are made up of? Atoms. Is it not? This is how the structure goes. The cells are made up of molecules. A collection of similar types of cells will give you the tissues. The tissues are able to form the organs, and collectively organs will form the organ systems, and organ systems will perform different life processes, different functions, and therefore it constitutes a particular organism. So importantly here, very important thing is, see, the nature is such that due to some environmental changes or the environmental effects, what happens is this particular order, cell, tissues, organs, organ systems will not be intact always. all the time this will not be intact. What happens? There could be a possibility of breakage of this order basically. Suppose if this order is broken, do you think an organism can live? Impossible. Isn't it? For example, if some of the organs fails, kidneys fail, what happens? Probably the organism may not sustain at all, may die basically, it may not sustain its life. So the breakage of these should not happen. But due to environmental consequences, due to natural environmental effects, there is a very good possibility that this particular order is quite frequently broken down. And how this is restored back by the organisms? Mainly these are restored back by the repair and maintenance activities. The repair and maintenance activities involve the movement of all these molecules over here, because all these are made up of molecules. Therefore, the movement of molecules are required in order to form these things and also repair these things and maintain in good condition. And therefore, we say the molecular movements, which are invisible movements, will also form the defining characteristic of a life. And therefore, we can conclude the two aspects, which are the visible movements and molecular movements. These two are the defining characteristics of life, or based on these two characteristics we can say that the organism is living. Now what we study is these visible movements and molecular movements are the defining characteristics of the life. Apart from that, I have to tell you something. See, nowadays the science is a much advanced condition, isn't it? The science has advanced a lot, and we know already the different body parts, especially human beings, the different body parts, what are their functions, how do they function, etc. So, in order to sustain the life, maintain the maintenance of the body and all, there are different life processes which are carried out. What are these life processes? The processes which are biological in nature and which are required to maintain this body are called life processes. Therefore, the characteristics of life basically, if I talk about the characteristics of life, that means what are the characteristics of life? If you ask me the question, the visible movements, the molecular movements and different life processes are the criteria to decide that something is alive. I hope you are understanding this one. Okay, let us have a look at the PowerPoint presentation also. Okay, fine. Let us go through some PowerPoint presentations. Yeah, here as I told you, what criteria do we use to decide whether something is alive? What criteria do you use? Something is alive. So definitely, you know, just a moment, I am setting now. Pen I use, yeah. See here, we use, let me use the change the color, just a moment. I think I'll use the blue color. Yeah. So here you can see what criteria do we use to decide whether something is alive. One is the movement of our body or body parts. Second is movement of the molecules in the body which is invisible to the naked eyes. Growth of the body and occurrence of various life processes. Most important thing is here, the different life processes are also the indication of something is having a life or something is alive. So these are the four important criteria. of which at least you can say occurrence of various life processes, movement of the body and molecular movements are the criteria to decide whether something is alive or not. Of course, growth of the body also is important. See, one question arises here. When I talked about the movement of animals and all, which are very good visible movements, but how about the plants and all? Definitely we say the plants are growing, one of the observations. Thereby we can say the plant is alive. Or you can look at the leaves, stem, etc. If the plant is having all green leaves, then also we can say yes, it is having a life. That is one observation. Another thing is, have you observed certain movements in certain plants basically, especially the tendrils and all, which surround the supports and all? There also we can observe the visible movements, and therefore we can say those are also living organisms. So in plants also it is possible, based on certain visible movements, that they are alive, isn't it? It is possible to decide whether those are alive or not. So plants grow, and that could be one of the reasons also which has been included over here. So what are the criteria to decide whether something is alive? These are the 4 criteria which are the deciding factors, or these are the 4 criteria to decide upon something is alive. I hope you have understood this. So please note down all these things. You can pause the video and note it down. Okay, fine. Let's go to next one. Yeah. So let us see. Let us try to define what are the life processes. Basically, the chapter itself is life processes. What are these life processes? How do you define it? Here it's given the processes which together keep living organisms alive and perform the job of a body maintenance are called life processes. Or in simple terms, you can define like this: the processes that occur in the bodies in order to maintain the life are called life processes. Is it clear? Simple terms, what I can say is, certain processes should take place inside the body, and those are required for the body maintenance and life maintenance, isn't it? For the body maintenance, repairs and maintenance of the body also you can say. So the processes that occur in the body of the living organisms which are required to carry out certain maintenance activities are called life processes. So this is a better definition actually formally. How do you define? Processes which keep the living organisms alive and perform the body maintenance job, which perform the body maintenance are called life processes. What are the examples of life processes? Nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion, etc. Under this nutrition we have digestion, etc. also. So these are the main life processes which you are studying also: nutrition, respiration, transportation and excretion. So let us try to understand these in detail. The first one we will take up nutrition, and what are the types of nutrition, classification, and we'll further study that. But before that, I hope you are able to understand what are life processes. Life processes are the processes that takes place inside the body to maintain the body structure are called life processes basically. Okay, fine. I think you should note it down also, very important. Next. Now let us define what is nutrition. Okay, what do you think is nutrition basically? This is a formal definition over here, but in very simple terms I will say the process by which organisms obtain their food and utilize that food is called nutrition. Very simple terms. In very simple terms, what did I say? The process by which an organism obtains its food and utilizes. Why the food should be utilized? In what way the food will be utilized? The food will be consumed and it will be converted to obtain the energy. Also the food is required to perform certain life processes, and also food is required for body maintenance and repair activities. Is it not? For example, if we have a cut and all on the hands and all, how do you think after few days it will get repaired? A particular tissue or the particular wound will get healed up basically. All those are because of the the development of the cells, development of new cells and all, for which energy is required and for which we have to consume the food basically. So nutrition is, in simple terms, it is defined as the process by which an organism obtains its food and converts it into simple absorbable substances. This is a formal definition, you can say. It is a process by which an organism obtains nutrients from food and utilizes to obtain energy, building and repairing their structures, building and repairing their tissues. It's called the nutrition. Now, a small important information is given one more here. What is the source of energy in that case? In order to obtain the energy inside the body, what is the source? As we said, food. Which food? It is an external food basically, isn't it? Fine. So the food serves to provide, the food serves as the one which provides energy and the food which helps us to grow our body. And how this food is utilized? Food is utilized by the body by converting complex substances into simple substances. See, food and all is quite complex in nature. It should be converted into very simple substances. Who will convert inside the body? There are something called enzymes, which are also called biocatalysts. What is their job? They break down the complex substances such as carbohydrates, proteins, fats, etc. These complex substances will be broken down into simpler absorbable substances by the body, isn't it? So the food serves all these purpose basically, and the enzymes are the ones which are also called biocatalysts, which will be able to break down complex food substances into simpler absorbable nutrients or simple absorbable substances. This is a small part of nutrition, introduction to nutrition. Now there is one question which comes quite frequently. Why is diffusion insufficient to meet oxygen requirements of multicellular organisms like humans? Thing is, what is diffusion? It is a process by which the substances move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, which you have studied. What is osmosis basically? Osmosis refers to the movement of substances through semi-permeable membrane from a region of the movement of substances. No, it is not the movement of substances, it is the movement of water only. What is osmosis basically? Osmosis refers to the movement of water across the semi-permeable membrane from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, whereas the diffusion need not require a particular semi-permeable membrane at all. So what is diffusion basically? Diffusion is the movement of substances from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Now, if you consider small simple unicellular organisms, how the oxygen requirement is met in the unicellular organisms? Can you be able to imagine? Being unicellular, the entire cell is exposed to atmosphere, and therefore a simple diffusion process for transfer of oxygen from the environment to the cell is enough to meet its oxygen requirement. But is the simple diffusion is enough for oxygen? It is enough for multicellular organisms like human beings and all. Is that diffusion is enough? Question to you is that diffusion process is enough for multicellular organisms such as human beings to meet oxygen requirements? No, it is not possible. Why it is not possible? The reason being, entire cells, all the cells of our human body are not exposed to environment. Is it not? We have our cells, tissues, organs, organ systems which are inside the body. All the cells are not exposed to the environment, and hence a simple process such as diffusion will not be able to cater to the requirement of the oxygen of the human body, especially which is a complex body basically. So what processes are required in that case? Therefore, in order to meet not only these oxygen requirements, in order to carry out different functions, complex organisms such as human beings require basically the organ systems or which are collectively which are formed by different organs, which are again formed by different tissues, and therefore it is not possible to meet the oxygen requirement of the body by simple diffusion process, as all the cells are not exposed to the environment. That should be our answer. So you can note it down also, the details, please note it down. This question is important, okay? I will read also for your information. In case of a single-celled organism, no specific organs for taking in food, exchange of gases or removal of waste may be needed, because the entire surface of the organism is in contact with environment, and oxygen requirement can be met simply by diffusion process. Is it right? Quite clear. In multicellular organisms, due to complex body design, and as all the cells may not be in direct contact with surrounding environment, and oxygen requirement cannot be met by simple diffusion, and organ systems like respiratory systems are required in order to meet the requirement of the oxygen by the entire body. So this is the answer. So let's see the next slide now. Yeah, here it's some interesting fact I have given here. How do living things get their food? Very important. See, some organisms, such as plants, plants especially, how do they obtain their nutrition? How do they obtain their food? The food is prepared by the plant by means of some simple inorganic substances such as carbon dioxide and water. Is it not? In the presence of sunlight, the chlorophyll traps the sunlight energy, and that is utilized for breaking down of water and in synthesis of glucose, which is a starch basically, or carbohydrates basically. So some organisms use simple inorganic substances such as carbon dioxide and water for the preparation of the food. So can we also use only simple substances such as carbon dioxide and water for the preparation of food? Impossible. So there are some organisms which are called basically heterotrophs, meaning which derive their food from other living organisms such as plants and animals. What do? They take the solid food, they ingest the solid food, digest it and assimilate it. For breaking down, and the food, the heterotrophs, which are called heterotrophs basically, and they have to depend for that food on outside. They do not heterotrophs do not synthesize their own food. They have to obtain the food from, and they have to depend for their food on other living organisms such as animals or plants. So again here comes the question, who will break down the complex substances that we consume inside our body? As I said, biocatalysts, which are nothing but the enzymes present in our body, are the ones which would be able to break down the complex substances that we intake into simpler substances, which can be absorbed by the body and utilized to generate energy for repair and maintenance of the body. Isn't it? So that's what. How do living things get their food? One way is some organisms use very simple substances, but other organisms like human beings use complex substances. As a food we consume complex substances basically. All these carbohydrates, proteins, etc. are not the simple substances. Those are very complex substances, organic molecules, which need to be broken down into simpler substances by means of the biocatalysts, which are called enzymes. Enzymes helps in breaking down of this complex substance. Yeah. Here this is not of much relevance. Important. I don't think anything is to be noted down in this slide. Not required. It's only for expression. Next. Yeah, there was one in-text question here. We'll go through this question and then go to. Question is, what are outside raw materials used by organisms? Outside raw materials. See, what are the raw materials used by the plants? CO2, water are the raw materials that are used by the plants for the preparation of the food. But what are the outside raw materials for animals basically? Food, water, oxygen, etc. are the external raw materials for the animals. For plants, the CO2, oxygen, water, etc. are the external raw material. So the one question was there, what are the external raw materials that are used by an organism? For animals, food, water, oxygen. For plants, CO2, water, oxygen, etc. you can say. One more question was, what processes would you consider essential for maintaining life? Life processes, isn't it? To maintain the life, what processes do we require? Life processes. Which are those things? Nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion. Please remember these 4 processes because these are the ones which we are going to study in detail. Are you able to understand? Nutrition, transportation, respiration and excretion are the systems which you have to look at. Let's see the next slide. Yeah, fine. This slide, I think, are you able to? Is it clear, or shall I change the color of this? Just a moment. So let us have a look at the types of nutrition. Before we see, once again I will tell you what is the nutrition basically. It is a process. Nutrition is a process by which an organism obtains nutrients from food and utilizes to obtain energy for building and maintaining the body structure, and that is called nutrition. Now, what are the different types of nutritions? We saw some organisms which use simple substances such as CO2 and water and to synthesize their own food are called autotrophs basically, or plants and green plants and algae come into that category. So first let us see what are the types of nutrition. Autotrophic nutrition, heterotrophic nutrition. Further, heterotrophic nutrition is categorized into saprotrophic nutrition or saprophytic nutrition, both are same. Parasitic nutrition, holozoic nutrition. So this is the broader categorization of nutrition. I hope you understand. Nutrition is categorized into autotrophic nutrition, heterotrophic nutrition. Heterotrophic nutrition is further categorized into holozoic nutrition, parasitic nutrition and saprotrophic or saprophytic. Saprotrophic or saprophytic nutrition. So these are the categorizations. So please note it down. Next. So here we are going to study what is autotrophic nutrition and heterotrophic nutrition. Okay. As the name suggests, auto means self. Trophs means nutrients or food. Self preparation of food is called autotroph, and therefore autotrophic nutrition means it is a mode of nutrition or it is a type of nutrition in which the food is prepared by the organism itself. Is it very clear? Now, so here therefore the definition is given. Autotrophic nutrition is that mode of nutrition in which an organism makes its own food from the simple inorganic materials such as carbon dioxide and water present in the surroundings and with the help of sunlight energy. Isn't it? So you have understood now what are the examples for autotrophs. Green plants and algae are the examples for autotrophs. Next comes heterotrophs, heterotrophic nutrition. It is a mode of nutrition in which organisms depend on other organisms for their food. Are you able to understand? For example, human beings, frogs, amoeba for that matter, we all depend upon, for our food we depend upon other animals and other organisms. Do you not depend upon other organisms? Or your body, see, it is not that the food is prepared by the human beings in kitchen and therefore we cannot say that we are autotrophs. Do you understand that? So we naturally depend upon for our food on other animals or other plants also. So heterotrophic nutrition, once again, how do you define it? It is that type of nutrition in which the food is derived from, or the organisms derive their food from other living organisms, such as plants and animals. That is called heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Examples, the best examples are all animals basically, and some fungi. Which are fungi basically? Bread molds, then mushrooms, etc. These also are basically the fungi. So you please note it down, autotrophic nutrition and heterotrophic nutrition. Then we will go to the classification of heterotrophic nutrition in the next slide. Please note it down. Here one more thing is heterotrophic nutrition. Heteros means other and trophs means nutrients or the food, nutrition or food you can say. How did you get this autotroph? Auto means self, troph means food. So the one which prepare its own food is called autotrophs, or that the mode of nutrition in which the food is synthesized is called autotrophic mode of nutrition. Similarly, heterotrophic is the mode of nutrition in which organisms derive their food from other organisms. That's what it is. Okay, fine. We'll go to next one. That is the classification of heterotrophic nutrition. We'll see that what is here. Again, as we see, there are three categories: saprotrophic, saprophytic nutrition, parasitic nutrition, and holozoic nutrition. Dear students, here before we check these definitions, it is very interesting to note one fact that some organisms take the food and break down the food into simpler substances in their bodies. You understood already who are which are the examples. Human beings. We consume the food from the external, we take the external food inside the body, and the food is broken down into simpler absorbable substances inside our body. There are some organisms where the food is broken outside before the organisms absorb those food. There are some organisms, one more category, where for the food these organisms depends upon other organisms without killing those organisms. I hope you are understanding that. See, some organisms, they live inside the other animals and obtain the food from those animals, or maybe plants also, but those will not kill those animals. That's important. So, see, these main three categories have been classified into these categories. When I said some organisms take the food inside and they break down inside, it is nothing but holozoic nutrition. What is that holozoic? It refers to the mode of nutrition in which the complex organic matter in the form of food is taken inside, ingested, digested, that means converted into simple substances, and assimilated, absorbed in order to obtain the energy and all. Isn't it? So in the holozoic, in holozoic nutrition mode, the organisms obtain this food and the food is broken down inside the body. I said one more category where the organisms break down their food outside and then they consume. What kind of organisms and what is the mode of nutrition? Here it's very important. Saprophytes are the organisms. Saprophytic or saprotrophic is the mode of nutrition. So how do you define this saprotrophic or saprophytic mode of nutrition? It is a mode of nutrition in which organisms obtain their food from dead and decaying organic matter. That means they break down the food outside and then they consume. The organisms which are called saprophytes or saprotrophs, what do? They break down the food outside and then consume it. So where is that breaking down is taking place? Outside their bodies. That means they are living on the dead and decaying bodies basically. So, saprophytic mode of nutrition, it refers to the method of or the mode of nutrition in which organisms obtain nutrients from dead and decaying organic matter. Which are the examples? Bread molds, yeast, mushrooms, etc. Parasitic, it is a mode of nutrition in which organisms obtain their food from other living organisms. Those are called parasites. Which are the examples? Worms basically. See here, tapeworms, roundworms. Worms are basically the examples for parasites. One more example is this lice, leeches. These are the best examples. In your book, it is also given this Cuscuta, Plasmodium, etc. are the examples for parasites. Now, let us understand the examples for all these three types once again. Saprotrophic nutrition, obtaining the food from dead and decaying organic matter. Examples: bread molds, yeast, mushrooms. All these come under fungi. Parasitic nutrition, obtaining the food from other living organisms, host animals, host plants. So, which are the examples? Cuscuta, Plasmodium, lice, leeches, tapeworms, roundworms, etc. Holozoic nutrition, mode of nutrition in which complex substances, organic substances are obtained in the form of solid food inside the body. That food is broken down. Example: amoeba, frog, human beings, etc. So please note down in detail all these things. Dear students, we'll end the session here. In my next lecture, we look at the autotrophic nutrition, that is nutrition in plants, in detail. Thank you very much. Wait for the next lecture.